heat like Miami or a heat wave. Bounce back when they tell you no. Debate your greatness and flair and let them enjoy the show.
I'm always the first to step away when it's on or when it goes down. When it goes down, even though I have it in me to change my life from a merry-go-round, I can do better than a merry-go-round. I can do better.
Right, so it's a live show, so I'm going to be asking questions to imaginary people, so please bear with me. Right, without further ado, I want to introduce our guest judges. Now, I feel quite honoured because, you know, all these judges, well, two of them welcome back, and one of them I've been trying to get a hold of for the last 3 months. Almost stalking her. So I'm going to introduce the first judge. His name is Flair. He's a UK rapper, very talented guy who was on our show 2 months ago. Please welcome him to the stage, Flair. Excellent. Second person I want to interview, I want to bring on to the guest judging panel is a broadcaster. She's a columnist, she's a writer, and she's actually responsible for MTV Base right now, so bringing black people into the MTV Europe scenario. I want to bring her to the stage. Her name is Jasmine Dotwala. Welcome, round of applause to Jasmine Dotwala, please. MTV Base, MTV Europe, MTV Eric. Welcome. And last but not least, we had this guest judge on last month. She's back by popular demand. Her name is Casey Shadrova. Casey. Actually, her name all at once. That's brilliant. I'm pretty proud. Casey's a mother and an English teacher, so I'm sure she'll have a very, very fiery opinion on all the topics as well. Welcome, guys. So you have a mic between the three of you. I'd like to ask a few questions quickly. Flair, there are no bad children, only bad parents. How do you perceive this argument to be played out today?
Boy, you know what? All I can do is talk from my personal opinion. I'm going to say good evening to everybody first and foremost. It all starts from the home, you know? That's my personal opinion, so feel free to disagree, that's not a problem.
Move on to Jasmine. Jasmine, what's your opinion on this topic?
Evening, everyone. I don't think any children are ever born bad. I don't think a baby can be born bad, you know? Okay. Children are really innocent, and I think they are the product of their environment. I think it starts with parenting in the home, but ultimately it's a mixture of society, role models, relatives, people at school, etc., etc.
We've got hecklers in the crowd in the audience.
I love a heckler.
Okay, cool. Hecklers. Thank you, Jasmine. Casey, same question.
Opens my eyes to, you know, when a parent sends a child to school, they're entrusting their most precious gift to other people, and there are so many influences. So I strongly believe in my heart there are no bad children. Children can make bad choices and bad decisions, but the minute you start to label that child as bad, I think that's where it, like we were saying earlier, it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So without further ado, I want to introduce the first debate team. They are the red team, and they are Alex Cavill. Please give them a warm applause as they're coming on. Victor and Flair. Alex Cavill, some of you guys will know, he's basically come to all our shows. He represents Idea UK, who we're hopefully going to be doing some kind of partnering collaborations with going forwards. Alex? And he's provided us with the debaters thus far, so thank you very much, Alex. Victor, I've done a lot of research on Victor actually, and he's a very good debater, probably one of the best in Europe, if not the best, #1 rated, currently as we speak. So, looking forward to what Victor has to say today, in that lovely red tie, representing the team. And Femi will be Flair debating for you guys, so really looking forward to that. And welcome guys, thank you very much. Second team, the blue team, they're a man down, but they tell me they're very confident. It's nothing but a thing. So I want to introduce Danny and Darren. Please welcome them to the stage. I was interviewing Darren earlier, and you know, he was going to give us a snippet, but I think that would have been a bit messy if he did that. Just would have given them all away. So they're going to be arguing against the notion there are no bad children, only bad parents, and the red team will be arguing for there are no bad children, there are bad parents. So I'd like to introduce, guys, you ready? Ready to proceed and judge and anything else? I'd like to introduce Victor. He's going to kick off the argument for there are no bad children, only bad parents. So please welcome Victor to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do and present this case is I would like to do it in like the ultimate form of irony, is where I'm going to rant against parents dressed like my dad. The thing is, why we don't necessarily think as proposition side so much about the age is we believe that the sort of same type of miscommunication happens in all stages of a child's life. So what we'd like to examine is how this miscommunication starts, and then how it plays out with sort of like the idea that our kids are the problem. They're like not conforming with society, and therefore they're very young, their very youth is something that needs to be cured. And when we do that, we usually reach for the government, and we've started doing that more and more often. And we believe that this sort of form of institutionalized solution is what's creating more problems in the first place. So we think that we should start from a point where we decide it's always the parent's fault if your kid is misbehaving. We don't think that necessarily we can give like an answer to, well, what you should always do in situation X and Y. How do you deal with the kid? If we knew that, we'd probably write a book about it. But we think that it's necessary for parents to look into themselves of where is this miscommunication happening and what they can change about themselves and in the dialogue rather than expecting sort of society to fix it. Because, as a society, we've grown very much apart from each other in communities. We're mostly, closed in our homes, closed in our cars, closed in our cubes, and are expecting government to solve our problems. So when I say about kids, if you look at even young kids, we oftentimes see them as being irrational and somebody that you cannot reason with. In fact, even there was a good example about how you should have a dog, which we think is a good advice. You should have a dog before you have a kid. But we notice that sometimes you tend to be more understanding of your dog than you are of your kid, because you can't really talk to your dog, so you try to figure out what is it that it wants. We oftentimes expect our children to sort of like rationally talk to us and tell us what they want and make things simple. And so tell you what you need, I'll give you what you need, and everything's sort of like going to play out. But oftentimes kids don't communicate like so simply. But they don't necessarily are irrational. Like if you look at a kid in a department store that acts out because it doesn't get the candy that it wants, we'll usually either give in and give him the candy, or we'll resort to punishment, where it's going to be either corporal punishment, which we think is horrible, or it's going to be some form of timeout or some form of depossession where you take his toy because he misbehaved. But if you look at the kid, his behavior is perfectly rational. And in fact, it's rational because of the parent. Because if I could get anything I want simply because I scream and yell, I would go to a Mercedes dealership and scream and yell until I get a Mercedes. However, I've learned enough through life that this isn't what happened. However, a young child, if it repeats this behavior, eventually and gets what it wants, it's the parent that is responsible for feeding into this habit. And we think that this is exactly the situation where the parent needs to ask themselves, why did I let this situation happen where my child is out of control? Rather than resorting to the idea that he is irrational and I need to discipline him in order to teach him sense. We think that this miscommunication then moves on as you grow older and as you become an adolescent. For example, once you're age 13 to 14, which is a very important period of your life because this is where you need to challenge authority in order to see how you feel about having authority at all. This is where you need to break a certain amount of rules. This is where you feel emotionally up and down, because this is where you figure out what you want in life, what do you like. Is romance something that is for you? Do you like sports? Do you like to fight? This is where you experiment with your personality, but this is not how society is starting to treat, adolescents. We see this as a problem, so we reach for solutions such as medicating our kids so that they wouldn't have ADHD, because, for God's sakes, if they cannot pay attention to school, something must be wrong with them. Or if they break authority, we've started to develop like the system of prisons and timeouts. And this is where we come to the problem of asking for the state for many of our solutions, because one of our solutions for this was to elect many politicians who said that they will solve the problems of youthful delinquencies. The problem is technocratic governments, which pretty much every government is, have a tendency to solve problems with eggheads, computer models, technical solutions. If you look at how they solve the economy, which is basically not exact science, it is humans interacting with each other that are always infinitely more complex than simple computer models, no matter how strong your computer is. They've never been able to predict how the economy is going to work or what people are going to react to. So see is that in recent times, we have an increase in many types of authority figures that are geared towards kids' crimes, which is why we have truancy polices, we have campus police, we have many people in uniforms that represent authority, that represent the state, who are out there policing our kids for things that we as parents should be discussing with them. This is where we think is one of the biggest problems, because our kids will then become what we expect of them. And for a young child, somebody who is even a young adolescent, somebody who is just entering adulthood, starting to figure out the structure, this is something that is very confusing because it sees his behavior as not something that is normal human, something that you have to go through, discovering about what is adulthood like. They see this simply as a crime. This is why we think it is very important for us to engage with our kids far more. This is why we think that this is very problematic, because our kids are not against authority, which is why our structure, which is why we wouldn't have gangs.
Evening, guys. So our team, our group, are arguing against the motion that there are no bad children, that there are only bad parents. First of all, the motion in itself suggests that conditioning is a part of a child growing up. So it suggests that you can make a child act a certain way by the way you interact with them or the way you bring them up. So wouldn't it be ignorant for us to look at conditioning only in the aspects of parenthood and not in the social influences? So why can't their childhood teachers or their childhood friends also influence them in the way that they behave? I'm going to look at the argument of nature be nurture. The nature side is saying that you were born in a certain way, so you have a certain biological inclination to act in a certain way. So, for example, a child who was brought up by a mother and is a boy, but is driven by his testosterone, how can we say that that mother is the person that's making him act in that certain way? Isn't the biological aspect also involved in it? And also, when we look at the nurture aspect, we look at the social aspect as well. So when you go to school and you have friends who are bad, I have little brothers and sisters who have friends who are not so good, but my family is a family that's brought up in a better way. So there's an issue if we want to say that only parents are going to shape the way that you are brought up. We can't actually say that parents are going to shape the way that you're brought up, but your friends are not going to have an influence on you. Your family does not have an influence on you. What about television? What about advertisements? This industry is making billions of pounds on influencing how we are. Let's look at shows like Top Boy. Top Boy is a show that is so popular with the youth these days, and it's making them think that they could go out and dress in a certain way or speak in a certain way. We're so influenced by these industries. We're so influenced by television, advertisement. We can't say that they don't have an influence on us as well. And also, the last thing that we want to say is that if we want to say that parents are your only influence, then we have to completely say that we live in a society where we don't go outside of our houses, we don't interact with other people, we don't give other people a chance to give us any type of opinion for themselves. And obviously we don't live in this society. We live in a society where we interact with other people. So we just want to say that this motion is completely incorrect, and our argument against stands strong. Thank you.
The fact that parenting, social influences, it makes a big difference to a child's life, because I've got an 18-year-old and a 10-year-old son, and I can understand the fact that what I teach, how I was brought up, really and truly had a massive effect on how I discipline my children as well. But not saying so, when they actually go out into meet their friends and so on, peer pressure is one of the biggest things that influence how a child behaves. How he behaves at home and how he behaves outside the parents' home is totally two different things.
Victor, I'm going to ask you to come out and rebuttal Danny's point.
Okay, there's actually some very good things that are noticed with her model that need to be discussed. I would actually like to address some of the things that are about the audience. When we discuss about very young parents, this is a very, very tricky issue. On principle, we have to stay with the idea that even then, we should expect from the parent to be the one who takes all the responsibility. However, this is a very hard case, given that many times you have kids having kids themselves without ever fully understanding the world around them, and they are responsible for somebody who is now entering this world. To be honest, we don't really know how to deal with this situation. However, we do acknowledge that the majority of parents are usually people who are of age and are mature, and are usually financially stable enough. And these are the people that we can blame and can expect them to be more engaged with their kids rather than just expect others to solve their problems. The thing that when you mention society, this is true. Society does play a major role, as much as your neighborhood kids and as much as popular TV shows influence you. But the fact is that these factors influence you only when there is a vacuum of said influence. That is, when you do not have a connection with your parents, when your parents are not your primary role model, this is when these things fall in to fill in the void. And it's very easy, it's very tempting to start blaming society and blaming television for things that are wrong with your kid. If your initial view of the world is that the problem is in my kid, not in me. Or if you then export responsibility to these outside factors. Never standing alone and saying, why is my kid watching so much TV? Or am I involved in my child's life enough to know whom he's hanging out with? What are his friends like? Is he with the wrong crowd? We think that it becomes very tempting to blame these factors for your kid's problems rather than yourself. But the consequence of that can be even more dire, because then you, as the primary caregiver, as the primary role model, even if you are not necessarily yourself purposefully involved, you are still the most important person in your child's life, can sometimes start to export this feeling of inadequacy to your kid, that it's, you're hanging out with the wrong crowd. You are watching too much TV, whereas, you shift sort of responsibility from yourself. I think it is a very hard topic, because there's certainly a laundry list of things that I would like to complain to my mom and to my dad that they could have done better. And certainly, looking back, I can understand why many of these things they couldn't have done. They themselves have been kids for a very long time. In fact, I sometimes think they're kids even in their late 60s. But I think one of the things that would have helped them most is to always ask the question, where are we at fault? This is why, in principle, we think this is a debate that we win. Because you should always assume that you are ultimately responsible for everything your kid does, even when you feel that it is out of your hands. Because this is when you take actions to change these things. This is when you stop going to so often to bars or to business lunches and decide to devote much time to your kids, if this is the case. Like I said, there are many people who are working 2 jobs and cannot necessarily make this, but we're sort of like expecting this principle to be applied to the majority of parents who can't afford this type of liberty. So even if you say testosterone is
1 minute to go.
I cannot control this kid. He is high on hormones, and all he wants to do is fight and run around and chase girls. I mean, I'm talking about from a boy's perspective, one more familiar to me. But even then, you should never allow these things to become a barrier. Because once you allow all these things to become barriers and say, it's testosterone, it's society, it's TV, this is when you start seeking outside problems. Because obviously all of these things are bigger than me as a parent. I can never hope to solve them. This is when you start asking the state to start solving your problems. And we as Proposition has pointed this out. This is what we think is one of the major problems of today's society. We keep expecting the state to regulate our kids' lives, which we think has imposed a huge amount of rules on them, and this understandable authority, coming with authority figures in uniforms. This is why we believe that your initial call, every time you have a problem with your kid, should be, what can I do better, and what should I do better? The reality is, you will not always be able to do that. You will not always have, the answer in your mind. You will not always have the right course of action in mind. You will not always have the resources. But this goodwill, this starting goodwill, is what
like to answer the question about the motion. The motion, just to clarify, is there are no bad children, just bad parents. Because we're arguing against, it doesn't mean that it's automatically meaning that we have to argue that there are bad children. We're just arguing against the motion, which is there are no bad children, they're just bad parents. And secondly, I wanted to rebut what my learned friend just said. And he was talking about us giving total attribution to the parents in the way they treat their children. I think that with this issue, as you said, it is a hard issue, but I don't think there's a complete right answer. I don't think it's either the children are really bad or the parents are really bad, but it's definitely not just the parents. Because you can't say that if the parents are really bad, then then the child is really bad, or the child is whatever. So, but if we do look at the influences that they have, that will give us a better analysis of what they'll turn out to be. As he said also, whilst he was giving his rebuttal, he did say some parents need to look at the children that the friends that their children are hanging out with. So he does accept that social influences are very, very important in the way your child turns out. Again, what I wanted to give acknowledgement to is, for example, a child that was brought up in a Christian household, and it's a very strong Christian household. For some reason, they turn out to be atheists. Or a child that's brought up in a Muslim household, and for some reason they turn out to be Christian. What does that tell us about your foundation, your parenthood? You might have a really strong foundation, but there is always outside influences. And I think for you to argue against that would be really ignorant, honestly, because you can't say that you're not influenced by other things. There is always influence of other things. And us saying that they're not influenced by other things would mean that we think that what our parents told us at the beginning of our lives are the same things that we have now. There is always foundation in your parenthood. Your parents give you a foundation. When you're in a society or in a family that is really, really good and bring you up to have manners and respect, when you go out and speak to your teachers, you have respect. When you speak to your friends, you have respect. But also, the friends you hang around with are going to give you some sort of influence that maybe your parents didn't want you to have. That's why you have to look at both aspects. And he talks about the government as well, and how some parents look at the government to attribute their responsibility to. The truth of the matter is, we don't live in a country where your parents police the whole country. We are under a government, we are under a representative democracy, and you have elected this government to give you their say. You have elected this government to run this country for you. So, unfortunately, your parent is not your prime minister, your parent is not your president. So there is always influences, and this is the structure of the country that we are in. Thank you very much.
Right, we're going to go on to the judges. You guys ready? Got your mics? Let's start with Katie. Before we start with that, please, could you give another round of applause to the babes? I think it's not easy to come up here and give an opinion. So I thought that was really good. Well done. So Katie, start with Victor. What was your whole outlook on his delivery and his factual?
Yeah, I think that two words that I wrote down that kept returning to me with your speech, Victor, were clarity and conviction. That struck me completely. You stood up there, as Isaac said, it's not an easy thing to do, but you seem to do it with ease. You seem to have a real charisma about you and a confidence about you. And a lovely balance of humour, but obviously keeping it to the point and professional in that respect. I've written down what I really liked in your rebuttal in particular. You had a real, again, clarity, a real thread. You knew exactly what you wanted to say, and you kept linking clearly back to that, so we could all follow what you were there to say, what your feelings were the whole way through. So I thought in that respect it was really, really clear. You had a humorous opener. The audience relaxed immediately with you. You were very present here. You picked up on Clench's dog analogy, little Staffy, love Staffs, they're lovely breed. So you were very present, you were able to listen to Clencher and bring that into your speech and listen to some of Danny's points as well. In terms of technique, I thought you hit the nail on the head, you were really good. In terms of the content, I loved what you had to say on a personal level, the mention of medicating children if they're not able to concentrate at school, and continuously coming back to parental responsibility. I think you could give Super Nanny a run for money, really, because you seem to really understand the psychology of children. I work with children, and I think you've got that perfectly. I almost want you to take you to work with me, because you seem to really have an understanding of how teenagers think and function, and the miscommunication that can occur between adults and children. So I really enjoyed that. That was a fantastic opening. In terms of critique, the only thing I would say, I felt that when DJ Joe put the 1 minute reminder on, it felt a little bit rushed, and it was distracting, and I think maybe we could have really homed in on making some use of that charisma and some profound examples to really go out with a bang, rather than feeling like it was a little bit rushed. But all in all, I thought you were fantastic. I really enjoyed listening to you.
Nice one. Katie went in. Very good. Nice. Jasmine.
Katie's breakdown of Victor was so complete. I feel like there's not much feedback to give. I agree with everything that she said. Victor, you had great charisma, you kept the audience engaged. I feel the structure of your feedback was very, very strong. It felt you really carried us through your narrative. And I already come, as most of the audience probably do, to this debate thinking that we're already on one side or another, and I felt that I'm already on your side, and you just made that feel stronger for me. I loved your development with humour, great sense of humour. We had a few of the audience chuckling quite regularly throughout the initial speech and the rebuttal, so that was good. You have a really good charisma with them. Like Katie said, there were just lots of role models where you made me think, he's right about that. Oh yes, he had another point there. It felt like you really knew your role and what you were talking about. So it was nice to be convinced of what I think the side is that I'm already on. So that was quite strong.
Thank you, Jasmine. It's looking very good. Victor. Nice one. That tie worked.
Indeed.
Pleasure.
Yes. Victor, you landed on the money, mate, honestly. In a nutshell, your delivery on point, your style, ability to just deliver your point across to the crowd and the audience and keep them enticed. It was really good, honestly. Like, I would say I was literally trying to pick out loopholes, but I was finding it very difficult. Do you know what I mean? Literally, you stood up there, and as Katie said, it's really daunting sometimes, and everybody's just all eyes on you, and it's like, okay, cool. But literally, it didn't feel like it was hard to soak in your points. It was like a sponge. I was just absorbing it willingly. I was absorbing it. I was just like, right, okay, cool. I see that. But you know what? If I was to say one thing, there was one analogy that I would just like to just paint. If I just turn this piece of paper around here, literally, social influence. All right, I just wanted to paint an analogy of a young kid, whose father's left him. Let's just say, for example, hypothetically speaking, and he's close with his mum. Been growing up with his mum for his whole life, and his mum's had to work 2 jobs to support him and her and get him through school and whatnot, and they've got a really, really good relationship. Literally, he's got a legitimate job, but he sees his friend Big T around the corner, who's getting into the kind of wrong crowd and who's doing dirty dealings and getting money, and he comes home seeing his mum, the shopping, having to make ends meet and whatnot, 2 jobs, struggling. He, like I said, he's doing it all legitimate. He's got a good relationship with his mum. He talks to his mum. But he thinks to himself, I don't want to see my mum struggle anymore, I don't want to see my mum struggle. Big T's getting money, Big T's told me he can help me get more money, than my little 9-to-5 job at Next. Why don't I see what Big T's got for me? Do you know what I mean? So he starts, rolling with Big T, doing a few things with Big T, getting a little money down the side, helping his mum out, he's saying to his mum, it's my job. Whose fault is that? But he's got a really good relationship with his mum. What do you put that down to? I just want to know.
Curveball. It's a curveball right there. Victor,
that's just something I want to hear, because you were spot on, mate. Okay. But just literally, that's the only thing I could probably throw at you, just to see what you'd say in that situation.
So you had nothing wrong to say?
Nothing. I just wanted to throw that in there, just to be a little bit different,
Very quickly, Victor. I need to...
That's cool.
Actually, thank you very much for that example, because ultimately, debate isn't black and white, it's proposition like portrayed. So that's the hardest question. What happens when the parent does everything right? Everything right. Like given the circumstances, given the situation, does in fact do everything right. The only message that then proposition can say is that you should try even harder. And there's no guarantee, in that situation there really is no guaranteed result. But ultimately, if he does have a good relationship with his mother, and I think history has shown that generally great men are created by the good mothers. In fact, I think single moms have created some of the most confident men that I've personally met. You know, coming also from a sort of broken home, but reality, little sympathy points there. But the reality is, only in those situations, the mother must not give up. It's up to her. She has to realize that despite the fact that doing everything right, she has to fight for her baby even more. And there is absolutely no guaranteed results. But we think that on principle, she should not, that's a make or break moment for her as a mother. Like, I am working 2 jobs. I'm getting not enough sleep. I have no time to see my son, and when I do, we wash dishes together and sweep the house. And I have no way to police like when he works and when he does. But this is like the moment where she should not trust, for example, the government to help her out, because that's like a worse solution. She should literally try and fight even more, which is very easy for me to say, hard for her to do. But ultimately, I would say that would be a better solution than expecting somehow society, you know, to topple his neighborhood friend.
Do you know what, top man? That's a really good answer. Honestly, I just wanted to throw that at him, you know, and I just wanted to see what it was about. And yeah, Victor, take my hat off to you, mate. Honestly.
No worries. Nice one. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to go to Gabby. I'd like an opinion from Katie, please.
Hi, Danny. Yeah, first up, I mean, hats off to you really. Victor started off, and I think sometimes it can be also intimidating to watch someone go first and have that time to think, what am I going to say, and run through your speech in your head. So you got up, you had a big smile on your face, you were very calm to begin with. And I think realistically, judging by what we've heard so far, a lot of people have, I feel, probably come here with the idea of there are no bad children. So, you know, you had a tough end of the question, I think, and I really like the way that you clarified that you're not arguing that there's bad children, you're just trying to take some of that responsibility from the parents and really narrowing the question down like that. I thought was a really nice touch. It felt a little bit, whereas Victor's was slightly rushed at the end, it felt like yours ended maybe a bit prematurely at the beginning. But what I noticed in your rebuttal, it felt to me, I've written down, like it genuinely felt heartfelt. That passion developed as you probably got a bit more comfortable and a bit more confident as you were standing up. You referred to your own experiences a bit, contemporary references like Top Boy, which I thought showed that you'd really thought about the question. In terms of critiquing, what I noticed with the structure of your argument, nitpicking slightly, it would be nice to hear you use the word also a lot, maybe a profound statement or something, some other way to introduce your structure so we can follow that a bit more clearly. It's very hard when you're nervous, but maybe pausing between points so we can follow that through. But, you know, all in all, I enjoyed listening to you, and I think you made some really nice points.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you very much.
Okay, Danny, well done.
Danny.
Danny.
Me.
Danny.
Me. Danny.
Danny.
Yeah.
That's what it says. Tommy, as everyone's already said, you got the harder side of the debate, and most people have come here thinking that they agree with the other team. So well done for getting up there and speaking passionately about what you believe in. I thought the structure in your setup was brilliant. You told us what to expect from your argument, and we did get that, and then you did set it up beautifully. So the structure of the whole talk was very good. I loved your nature versus nurture thing. I mean, as I said, came in believing what Victor's team are talking about, but you nearly swayed me. I'm very good at having an opinion, but if I listen to a great debate, I can easily be swayed from side to side, and I felt like you nearly swayed me with the whole biological end, and then I just wanted an example, a real good example of the fact that children are bad, because we've all, of course, heard of examples where, you know, children, I don't know, come from great families and they might be child killers or something, and I wanted you to just bang it home with something that gave me that example, so I felt you nearly got, and then I felt that I wasn't quite there by the end. But as Katie mentioned, there was a lot of passion there, and I really enjoyed what you had to say.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Great job.
Yes, Dami. Whereas Victor, I would say he was able to sort of strategically map out his a bit more clearer than me. I would say you had the fire in your belly. You stood up and was like, was coming at us, you know, and that's exactly what it's about. The passion is what always catches my attention. One thing that stood out for me, I would say, is when you made the example about Top Boy. Now, from what I've seen, like I said, this is my personal, you know, viewpoint. And literally from what I've seen, when I've spoken to younger kids, if I've heard kids on the bus, just on public transport, they're really pumped about things like Top Boy. You know, and I think the reason why they're pumped about things like Top Boy is because they can switch on TV, you know, and see the lifestyle that they live. You know, people who they associate with, people who they look up to, like Asher D and Kane Robertson, you know, that they look up to acting on TV and acting out their lifestyle, so to speak. So I wouldn't say that, you know, things like Top Boy influence them for the wrong, because if you watch the plot of Top Boy, you'll see that in no way does it glorify the violence. You know, like they look like they're getting away with stuff, but there's always repercussions at the end, and that's how they have to balance TV. You can never even see the villain getting away with stuff, because it does influence kids to go out there and go and do stuff that is bad. But you always see, like, for example, I believe that Bashi got set up this week or this episode. I didn't watch it, but literally, you always see the villain end up worse off on TV. I don't know whether it's the same in life, do you know what I mean? But literally, you always see that. So in terms of having things like Top Boy swaying kids for the worse, I know some kids will watch it and get pumped up and be like, yeah, I need to go. But then I don't think having things like Top Boy on TV is such a downfall. I think it's a positive thing, because it lets kids know, like, wow, people are watching us, they're paying attention to our lifestyle, that it's real what we're living on the roads. I just wanted to say that your passion is there. You know, I just feel like next time when you come up, just try and strategically map it out a bit more. You know, and just come at us a little bit more with, that kind of clarity that the red team came with, yeah. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Fletcher. Thank you very much. That was
and bring the heat like Miami or a heat wave. Bounce back when they tell you no. Debate your greatness and flair and let them enjoy the show.
I'm always the first to step away when it's on or when it goes down. Even though I have it in me.